hopefully it won't start talking to us again. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, trying to get my agenda up at the same time. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Bend Metropolitan Planning Organization. We will call to order. I am Barb Campbell. I'm the chair of the MPO, and I'm a counselor from the city of Bend. Bill, are you here with us today?
Here. Sorry, I didn't realize my camera wasn't on.
That's all right. Good afternoon. Megan?
I'm here.
Hi, thank you. We just found out that Rita will be joining us a little later. And then how about, we got Bob Townsend with us today?
Yes.
That's great. Hi, Bob. Hovey, are there any other participants or folks that you would like to introduce?
Yes. So for staff, we've got Tyler Deakey, MPO manager, myself, Hobie Anderson. Andrea Napoli is not in the office today. And then we've got Gregory Bryant, community member and MPO TAC member, as well as others, budget committee. Brian Potwin with Commute Options. Cameron Prow, Typewrite 2, she's our recorder today. Chris Doty, Deschutes County. David Abbas with the City of Bend. Henry Stroud with Bend Parks and Rec. Jillian DeMedio, she's with ODOT and she'll be giving a presentation. Rick Williams with ODOT Region 4. Tori Carr with City of Bend Finance Department, helps us with our MPO budget. Wayne Kittleson, and then we got a couple others. Janet Greger, she's on our MPO budget committee, and Matt Kittleson, who does lots of projects for us. That is the group.
Great. Thank you, Hovey. Welcome, everybody. We are happy to have you with us here today. Next, we've got our virtual meeting guidelines, and Hovey will take us through those.
Yes. So there is no chat function with this meeting, but please raise your hand at any time if you have any concerns or questions. There's a live transcript button. It's 2 C's in a square, and you can follow along. The meeting is being recorded and also on YouTube, so you can see it there as well. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Next up is public comment. This is the time when we open our meeting to anyone who would like to make a comment to the Bend Metropolitan Planning Organization. Have we got anyone that would like to speak?
I don't see anybody with their hands raised at this time.
I don't either. So maybe I'll speak just a little bit slowly, just in case there's anybody.
I don't see anyone.
All right, off we go. That gets us to item 4 on our agenda, which are the meeting minutes. I would happily entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the February 15th, 2022 Policy Board meeting.
I move approval for the February 15th, 2022 Policy Board draft meeting minutes as presented.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion from Board Member Perkins and a second from Mr. Chang. All those in favor, please raise your, or any discussion. I always forget. I should ask. No discussion. All right, now we'll vote. All those in favor, please raise your hands. Hovey, are you able to see them all?
Yeah, let's see.
And that's unanimous.
I had everyone.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And that gets us to item number 5. This is the 2021-2022 supplemental budget and the 2020
I
2022.
know, all the numbers. Next year's work program.
Too many twos. 2022 and 2023 work program and budget updates. And Hovey will take us through this agenda item. Thank you, Hovey.
Yes. So today we're asking for a consideration to add additional funds to our current year budget. We are looking to add surface block grant funds, surface transportation block grant funds, which are available to us on an annual basis. And ODOT has a fund exchange program, so this is where we would be getting those funds. There is an exchange dollars to receive these funds, but no match requirement. The intent of these funds is to add a multi-year consultant contract to get us started on our transportation model update, which is in 2024, more 20s. And that is a federal requirement that we don't get to change that date. So we're just trying to get ahead of all of the process and adding additional funds to our consultant line item. So on the next slide, it will show you the funding amounts. And this is what our budget looks like as a summary. The highlighted dollars is where they will be added. So the new funding request is for $156,000, and that would go into our task 4 of our budget and work program, which is modeling and data collection. So that's where we're adding the funds to. And then on the next slide, we can talk about process. So I might have put these in out of order a little bit, but that's okay. We'll talk about this for a second and then I'll come back. So the supplemental budget is separate, and then this slide is actually our key dates for what's coming up for our budget development for 23. So starting July 1st of 2022 is a new budget cycle for the MPO. We operate on an annual budget. Go ahead, Cameron.
I'm a little confused about titles. I thought when you say fiscal year 23, that means the one that starts 23 and runs into 24.
It's actually, if Tori can correct me if I'm wrong, but 23 would be the date that's the one it ends in.
That's correct. So when we refer to fiscal year, the 23 means that the year ends in 2023. So that would be
Okay,
June 30th, 2023.
thanks. I appreciate the clarification.
Yeah, it's just one of those that I have to remind myself of as well. So just coming up, you're going to see the MPO policy board as well as the community members on our budget committee will be seeing some draft documents, as well as the public will be available at the end of this month to review our proposed budget for this next coming year. The dates on the slide just show you when the meetings will be available and what we'll be looking to see. So there'll be a budget available on the 1st of April. The 7th of April is the budget committee meeting. That's a publicly noticed meeting. Anybody can come and provide comment. And then there'll be another legal notice about the policy board's deliberations and determinations of our budget consideration later in April. So those things are just coming up. And I just wanted to keep that going. So there's also a public notice about our work program. So the work program and the budget are similar documents, but the work program is about 60 pages longer. So that's what we've got there, and a cat in the background. Sorry. So Tyler, on the next slide, I think we'll switch back.
Yeah, I'll have to back up a couple of slides
Yeah.
because this is the last slide I have.
Okay, I think the action, there was supposed to be one just talking about this budget amendment first before I went to the next slide. So I just wanted to not get too confused. So what we're asking for the MPO policy board to approve is a resolution to add that $156,000 that's in your packets that shows the additional funds for this fiscal year 22. So if there is a motion, that would be the policy board action to move approval of the proposed budget amendment, or if there's any questions. Oh, hold on.
You're
Let
muted,
me
Barb.
unmute you.
Thank you, Hovey. Are there any questions? I thought I'd let anybody else go ahead of me if there were. I have a question. So intent of these funds is to set up multi-year consultant contract for work on the Bend Redmond transportation model.
Correct.
Redmond is not a part of our MPO. Is there anything we need to know about that?
I can talk about that. So although the Redmond is not in our model, the transportation system is highly affected by the Bend Redmond dynamics, how people go to work, where people live. So when we review our transportation model and add information into that, such as housing and employment, we use a lot of Redmond's data as well. So the extent of our travel demand model goes north of Redmond and south of Bend to Deschutes Riverwoods, and a little, it's probably right about there. So that transportation model is larger than the MPO boundary.
That's great. I'm happy to hear that. Good. Thank you, Hovey. Any other questions? I think that means we might be ready for a motion. Is that right? So
Didn't type it up very nice, but
that's all right. We'll figure it out. It really is simple. We're just looking for a motion to approve the 2021-2022 supplemental budget by way of resolution 2022-01.
I was going to say that, but I'll just say so moved.
Great job. Thanks, Phil. And I bet Megan's going to second.
Oh,
for us.
second, sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Thank you so much. So we have a motion from Commissioner Chang and a second from Councilor Perkins. All those, and I thought I did see a hand go up there.
Cameron did for a moment and went back to.
Cameron, have you got a question right now?
No, my clarification was going to be, I thought there was a motion, a sample motion on the agenda that somebody could have read.
That's exactly right. Thank you,
Okay.
Cameron, for all of your help for us always. Great. So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And that looks unanimous to me. Bob, were you a yes?
Yes, I was.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I can't see everybody on my screen. Appreciate that. All right. So that passes unanimously, which gets us to agenda item number 6, which is reallocation of returned surface transportation block grant awards. And Tyler will take us through this issue.
All right, thank you, Counselor. So I think if you recall, Andrea Napoli has been to the board a couple of times, actually several times over the last few months, talking to you about developing a process for, what happens when we have some of our discretionary funds that we've awarded to projects returned to us, or simply not used. And we modified our policy maybe 2 or 3-4 months ago in that regard. And so what we're wanting today is just your consideration of how we want to reallocate some of those returned funds to an eligible project. If you recall, the policy board finalized policy language about the use of returned funds, and there were 4 categories that were considered. We went through a process with our technical advisory committee, as well as some other transportation entities within the area and solicited and sent out a notice that funding was available and sought eligible projects seeking access to those funds. One project was submitted, and that's for the Riverfront Street Deschutes River Trail project. And we will, in just a moment, we'll have a presentation on this. We had staff from the City of Bend and Bend Parks and Recreation District walk through that proposal at our Technical Advisory Committee earlier this month. And the technical committee had a recommendation of approval for use of those return funds for that project. I just have one more slide before I let our presenters jump in. And so if you recall, we have about $320,000 of renounced or returned funds, and those were from two projects. Those are from the Broster House Road undercrossing project. And that is a project where a trail is being extended underneath the railroad tracks on Broster House. The city had applied for those funds for that project. They were able to, through cost savings on the Murphy Road project, they were able to self-fund that effort. So they did not need those funds. And then same thing, Bend Park and Recreation District had received funds for improvements at the Ferguson Road trail crossing. And again, the city is going to be able to complete those trail crossing improvements as part of a utility project. And then additionally, our 2021 funding that we actually received from ODOT was about $26,000 more than we had anticipated. So combined, there's about $347,000 of available funding. So with that, I will turn it over to our presenters. We have David Abbas from the City of Bend and Henry Stroud from Bend Park and Recreation District are going to walk us through what this proposed project is, and I will advance it. And David, are you starting?
Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, Tyler, thank you. David Abbas, Director of City Bend Transportation Mobility Department, and going to tag team here today with Henry Stroud, planner from Bend Parks and Rec District. Henry, thanks for joining.
Yeah, good morning, everybody.
Am I able to share now?
Dave, it looks like Tyler's got the slides up.
Yeah, David, do you want me to run the slides or do you want to share?
Oh, if you want to run them, that's fine.
Yep, I've got them in here if you want.
Perfect. So yeah, we're going to tag team this and let Henry start us off here with the location.
Yeah, well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for taking the time to consider our proposal this morning. As Dave said, my name is Henry Stroud. I'm a planner with the Bend Park and Recreation District. I mostly focus on development of our trail system, and we're here to talk about today a project that we're really excited about but has been stalled for a long time for a number of reasons that we'll get into. But just to orient yourselves, this is a map that shows downtown Bend. I've rotated the map. Normally we have north at the top, but now we have north on the left side of the screen. And then there's some major landmarks there to orient yourself. The blue lines on the screen are all of the existing trails that exist through this corridor. So we have a very extensive network of trails that collectively really make up this portion of the Deschutes River Trail. Most of you are probably very familiar with Riverfront Street, but in the small chance that you're not, it's located in the Old Bend neighborhood, and you can see it right there in the center of the screen. Riverfront, as the name implies, runs along the river between Drake Park and the Miller's Landing Park Whitewater Complex. And this is a very important street for us. The street serves really as a part of the Deschutes River Trail, and this is the most heavily used trail in Bend. A nearby trail counter at the Colorado Street underpass counts on average 1,200 trail users per day. This is a very important transportation and recreation facility, and really is one of the last remaining gaps on the Deschutes River Trail through Bend. And the reason I call it a gap is because the current conditions of the street are relatively poor. There's a narrow right-of-way, and the Park District has long sought to improve the condition of this section of road. We have been actively working on closing the gaps on the DRT through downtown. There is one more gap that you can see. These are the dashed lines or plan trails that extends from Drake Park to Pacific Park. And we are currently working to extend that trail as part of our Drake Park improvement project. And we broke ground on phase 1 of that project just a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, and you can see in the picture for Riverfront Street, that's about the current condition. That's really what it looks like. It's a narrow 40-foot right of way. You have 4-foot sidewalks that are fairly disjointed, and the overall condition of the asphalt is fairly poor. Next slide, Tyler. Dave, you want to take this one?
Thanks, Henry. And Henry touched base on this on that last slide, but this project, it's been discussed for a number of years between the city and Bend Parks and Rec as a need. It's run up against funding limitations. As Henry mentioned, there's limited right of way. There's only about 40 feet of right of way there. There's various utility impacts that would be made. And so the project has just kind of stalled out, but it's been on both the city and Bend Parks and Rec's radar for a number of years now. And kind of that missing link as referred to what I'll call is the developed Deschutes River Trail. As Henry mentioned, there is some infrastructure there. There's narrow sidewalk only on one side, number of barriers. The street's conditions are failing, but this would be that missing link between Galveston and Miller Landing. And to point out that this missing link, really connects up to 4 pedestrian crossings of the Deschutes River. There's Miller Landing there with Colorado. There's the Gilcrest pedestrian bridge, there's Galveston, and then the Drake Park Bridge. So right in this vicinity, there's 4 crossings of the river that are vitally important, I think, for our transportation system, all modes, our efforts with the TSP, vehicle mile traveled reduction, and those things. Street pavement conditions, as I mentioned, near failure, excuse me. The pavement condition indexes are down in the low 30s to the low 40s, really beyond our cost-effective street preservation treatments. So it's kind of fallen off our radar a little bit for our, keep the good roads good and stretch our maintenance dollars. And so this has kind of really fallen into more of a, what I'll call a capital improvement project need. The TSP identifies this as a planned low stress network, kind of that missing gap and infill in that gap there. So Bend Parks and Rec has some funding budgeted. Henry will talk about it a little more in the next slide, but a little over $700,000 in their 5-year CIP. And so with this opportunity of these unused funds, our Transportation Mobility Department, the city would really like to really team up with Bend Parks and Rec, as well as our city Bend utilities, as well as some of our street preservation funding, and make this a complete street synergy project. So next slide, please.
So just a little bit of background on where we're at in terms of designing this project. The Park District held a series of several public meetings in late 2015 and 2016. And based on the results of those public meetings, we started developing concepts based on the input we had gathered from the community. The first concept, which is our base concept, was essentially to repair and improve the existing conditions of the street. So this involved widening the sidewalk to 6.5 feet throughout the whole corridor. And then it maintained the existing road conditions where we have lanes of traffic in each direction, as well as some limited on-street parking. Our estimated cost for this concept was just around $1 million in 2017. In addition to that base concept, we also developed 3 alternatives. Each one of these alternatives involved the construction of a full width, or at the time was full width, really kind of the minimum width we look for now for multi-use trails, for separated trails from the roadway. So that would involve a 10-foot trail along the west side of the roadway. And each one of these alternatives comes with different trade-offs, because I had mentioned the narrow right-of-way. If you want to build a full trail in there, you're always losing something. So one of the concepts we looked at converting the road to a one-way road with just having southbound traffic. And then the other 2 alternatives involved either a loss of all of the on-street parking or other impacts to right-of-way and to moving curb lines fairly close to some of the existing structures. These cost estimates are really in the same ballpark as the base concept. They're all from around $1 million to $1.2 million. In addition to, or I guess one thing I should mention is all of the concepts, the base concept and all of the full width trail concepts involve several traffic calming measures that we're looking to install on the roadway, really to make that space a safer shared use space. First and foremost is getting a complete accessible route through that whole corridor. The sidewalk is very disjointed and there's no accessible route through the corridor. We're also looking at doing some elevated sections of roadway, particularly at the entrance to the Miller's Landing Park, as well as Gilchrist Alley, which is the current gravel alley that leads to the bridge over the river that connects to Bend Parks and Rec property, Columbia Park on the other side. So, despite developing all of these concepts, we were not able to move any of them to a 100% final design phase. What became very readily apparent through our consultations with the city was that the street needed to be fully reconstructed, and there were numerous utility impacts that really were kind of beyond the pale of what the Park District could take on our own. And the need for a synergy project or a joint project was born. And as such, we've continued to hold just around $700,000 in our CIP. This is money that we've included in our CIP every year for the last 3 years, and we'll continue doing so as long as our board has an appetite. But really, we've got that money with the hopes that the city would come to the table and that we'd be able to secure additional funds. And Dave can tell you, I probably call him once every 2 months and say, "Hey, Dave, how about this project? We got this money." Yeah, so, I'm hopeful that we can get funding. In terms of the funding outlook, we've got that $700,000. We would be very, very grateful if we were able to have these remaining STBG funds, which would bring us much closer to the original estimated cost from 2017. With these funds, we want to move the designs to a 100% design phase. So we want to go back, look at these concepts in more detail, see what we can do with kind of the base goal of, at a minimum, improving the road and getting an accessible route and safer, slower traffic route along the street. And then hopefully, and Dave can probably speak more to this, we would have a more accurate cost estimate, and the city of Bend would be able to bring some additional funds either through their street preservation program or their utility program, as well as be the project manager for the project. Because of the numerous utility impacts and really the nature of this type of project, it's really a roadway project. We're really thankful that the city is willing to step up and manage the project for us.
Henry, just a quick question, just for the board members. What kind of public process do you envision, as you step through getting a final design and, picking a preferred alternative?
A lot of that hasn't been determined yet, Tyler. We did have a number of meetings which were now 7 years ago. So we do anticipate a public process. How many meetings? What the scope of those, we're not really sure yet. And that would also be done in addition to any public outreach that the city would do as part of their normal due diligence and work on a project. But the Park District is willing to lead those processes and rely on the previous stakeholders and contacts that we established the first time around.
And from a timing standpoint and funding, Tyler, while we're still on the slide, what's shown there in those bullets under the funding, City of Bend street preservation funding to be determined with final design. Also the utility funding, perhaps our utility folks can help with some of this and really come up with those final numbers. And I'll also add timing wise, if this project, gets scoped and that last bullet there touches on the public outreach, there would definitely be a public outreach aspect to this. In working to final design. But if that was to kick off, say this year and take place this coming winter, fall and winter already, which seems crazy, but we're already going to be having the biennial budget discussions for the next 2 years. And if we, had some good numbers to work with here from this design effort, we can wrap this project up into the next biennial budget conversation. So I think we could come up with a variety of funding from different buckets, and would be grateful for the MPO funding here to help with this effort and make this a synergy project and a needed project, in my opinion. Next slide, Tyler, please. Just to tie this back to some of the needs in the area, these are out of our TSP, and on the left, I know hard to see, but I think everybody knows where we're looking about and talking about right there in the kind of center of the city, but the projected housing growth on the left, projected employment growth on the right. This missing link is right in the middle of those, heat map areas. And again, I think is a great piece of our infrastructure to help with the TSP initiatives and vehicle miles traveled. So somebody's able to walk or bike or roll, across the river between home and job and getting your milk at the grocery store, for example. Next slide, please, Tyler. These are really tough to see. If anybody has questions, maybe Tyler could zoom in if needed. But on the left, as I mentioned, missing link there, as you'd see along the river, not having the orange line there tying into all the other paths and networks that Henry referenced. And on the right, I had mentioned this is a planned project, low stress bike network identified in our TSP. And it's kind of down there in the middle on the lower part of that graphic, identified as red. So our TSP, also recognized and identified this need and needing to be planned. And so that's what we're trying to do here. And wrap up on the next slide here with just kind of some of the existing conditions that Henry and I have referred to as far as some of the failing pavement and barriers and things along the sidewalk. And Henry and I'd be available to answer any questions you might have with the final slide.
Are there any questions for David and Henry?
Phil?
Phil.
I'm excited to see this project move forward. Clearly, the basic street at Riverfront is, this is kind of my neighborhood. The basic street conditions are terrible. And having that path in there will be a huge benefit for bike ped connectivity through the area. I'm a little puzzled by the funding mix. It's clearly the Park and Rec District should be investing in this project because pathways are one of the district's jobs. But the fact that there wasn't already a substantial amount of city street funding committed to this project, it just, given how bad the condition of Riverfront is, it just doesn't seem like a proportionate, that is proportionately the city's problem, a big part of it. And it just seems like there should be a larger partner contribution to the project or a commitment already. And so I just wanted to ask about that.
Thanks, Phil. Great question. So the project is not identified in our capital improvement project, the city CIP list. It's an existing street. And so really that falls into kind of the operations and maintenance with our budgets here in Transportation Mobility Department. And with the conditions of it being, with the pavement condition indexes down in the low 30s, kind of nearing failure, which has happened over years. But this hasn't been a focus of ours from our limited operations and maintenance dollars and our street preservation policy of keep those good roads good and extend the life of those assets, stretch those maintenance dollars. But then over the last few years here with the Bend Parks and Rec funding and them having it in their CIP, I am not against putting some of my street preservation dollars to it. And then also have the discussions in the next biennial budget to put some more city resources to it, Phil, because the utilities, the streets, those are the city's responsibility. It just hasn't been really elevated on the front burner. It's been kind of on the back burner, and those continuing discussions for sustainable transportation funding. And well, then the GEO bond passed, and there's the focus on those kind of CIP projects. So
yeah,
what we're looking to do is take this to final design, Phil, and have that a good cost estimate in today's dollars, not 2017, and see how we need to bring some more city funds to this, whether it's a combination of street preservation, utilities, or some of our transportation CIP kind of construction funds with this next biennial budget.
Yeah, Phil, I would just add to David's comments too, that I agree on the surface, it may look a little lopsided at the moment. I think where the Park District sees a lot of value that may not be shown in that simple budget is having the city's assistance, both as a project manager, as well as the city's ability to leverage their franchise agreements with the various utilities, which can require utilities to be moved at the cost of the company. There's various power lines. I'm not sure of the exact situation down there, but I think there may be some value that the city would be bringing that's not shown. The CMCI, or construction management and inspection, for this project would be a very, very large task and cost for the Park District. And a lot of that is going to get subsumed into the city if it becomes their project.
Yeah.
Thanks for those explanations. I'm good with that. And I think I also picked up the sub-story that when a street has fallen below a certain threshold of maintenance, it's there's the point where a street is starting to decline, where you can go in and do some work that will save you a lot of money in the long run, and then when it drops beyond that level of quality, there's no financial motivation to do it this year instead of 3 years from now, and that's how you get a street that looks like that.
Well, yeah, and I would just say too, Commissioner, that and David could correct me if I'm wrong, but the city's focus for much of the last decade has been on the arterial and collector street systems. And it's been just the last 2 or 3 years that they've been able to start actually, doing improvement work on local streets. Given budget limitations in the past, the real focus was on, the main roadway network within the city. And so you see things like Riverfront that were, had minimal to no maintenance for a very, very long period of time.
Phil, I think you described it very well. Those streets that are failing, I think, are some of the hardest ones to decide. Frankly, after, like you described, it's gotten to that point where chip seal is not going to help this road, and grind and overlay is not going to help. Those would honestly be a waste of money, we've decided. And so we're trying to squeeze all of the life out of this thing that we can possibly get until it fails to the point that people are breaking their axles in potholes or something. And yeah, these are hard to decide when that point of complete failure has arrived, and now we've just got to fix the road. So I'm really happy to see that we've thought of a partnership to help with this particular section. Greg, I saw you had your hand up for a bit there. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I've got a question for David. Are there other streets that are in this bad a condition that's in the city?
There's a list.
Sorry.
And a lot of them are the local residential roads that have, were neglected for years. And the motivation, as you referred to it, Phil, is there. It's the resources and the funding to go tackle them. But yes, there is other streets, Greg Bryant. This is just an opportunity of synergy with Bend Parks and Rec to team up and take care of this one.
So pertaining to those other streets, what's the possibility of getting those done in the next 5-10 years?
Well, we're going to be having discussions in the next few months here with city council and kind of the sustainable funding for transportation, O&M, whether that's, transportation utility fee, something along those lines. There was the discussion when the GEO bond was being prepared, for those that were on the call here that were involved with that. Remember, there was the large GEO bond amount, and then there was a lower that we felt that was more in the appetite of the community. And in a larger number, Greg, as you recall, there was an element in there for failed streets.
Yeah.
And so today it's really kind of an unfunded need as we continue to dig ourselves out of this hole and get our system up into that, more cost-effective maintenance realms and the focus on the keep the good roads good, not going after the worst case first, which is the very expensive reconstruction work. But the motivation's there.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands for questions. I have a question for the policy board. So we are the Bend Metropolitan Planning Organization, but the whole point of these planning organizations is to plan when cities have run into each other, when the population has merged. And so a street, for example, for us, someday it will be Redmond, and we will be cooperating with Redmond to make sure that all of our streets connect and, the planning is done. But right now, the Bend MPO, it is larger than just the city of Bend, but not Redmond. The Bend MPO includes Deschutes River Woods and Tumalo. So the question for me, for the policy board, I think it is very clear that this is a project that absolutely would benefit Bend and would be great for Bend. Does our policy board also believe that, yeah, this will be a benefit for the entire MPO? Has anybody got a comment on that question?
When I was asking about kind of the level of the city's contribution and commitment to this project, I was kind of getting at that.
There we go.
And yeah, I certainly think that this is a project that provides benefit provides benefit to the entire MPO area, but it is. A lot of the benefit accrues within the city of Bend, and it would be reasonable to ask about, well, I guess in part it depends on what else we could be spending our STBG funds on. But if there are a whole lot of other things we could be spending our STBG funds on, I think it'd be reasonable to kind of consider a partial funding of this $346,000 kind of proposal, and then using using those remaining STBG funds on other projects. But that in part depends on there being other good projects that are eligible.
That's a great question, Phil. We have a process for distributing those STBG funds, and then what has happened is some of those folks who got those funds were not able to spend them for some reason. That's exactly right. And so now they've come back to us. We also have policy language about what to do in this situation. And what we decided on this situation was to see if any of those other awarded projects need a little bit more money, or if there was some project that applied that has already gone through the application process that might need some money. And all of these policies are designed to save us money, or save us time, quite frankly, so that we're not looking at projects one at a time. It is an orderly process where every few years we decide what we think we want to do. So in my mind, I think the option is, and then also on what we can do with the leftover money is contribute it to the City of Bend Street Preservation Program. So that street pres program for specifically Bend was called out as a place we could put leftover or returned funds in order to get that money out into the community as soon as possible so that it can actually be turned into infrastructure that we all want, instead of it going into the pot for the next round of applications. So thank you so much, Phil. Your comments are really valuable. For myself, I completely understand what you're saying is, essentially the City of Bend should be paying the most for this project. But in this case, I would say that the City of Bend Parks District, can kind of be lumped into that between the Parks District and the City of Bend. That is where most of the money is coming from. And then from us, for those of us who are looking out for all of Bend and Deschutes River Woods and Tomalo, it's that lesser contribution. So, while my microphone is still on, I would make the comment, I agree with you, Phil. I think that this is a resource that is much further than Bend. A whole lot of people come to downtown Bend, floating the river. A lot of those people walking in the summer are getting from the point where they took out of the river and going back up to Miller Landing, get back in, go around again. And I think it's just a fact. Some of those folks are from Redmond. Some of those folks are from Tomalo. Some of those folks are from, who knows where beyond the City of Bend.
I'll add too, Counselor. It ties into the Hall Road Trail. It ties into all those, that Bend Parks and Rec have. And so I think it's would be a widely used infrastructure. And I totally expect that the, city's contribution to this is not going to be a small amount. It's fair to say that the, roughly $1 to $2 million project estimate from 4 years ago, when Bend Parks and Rec was doing their concepts, is going to be considerably higher now. And so whether that's a combination of our street pres funds or our capital funds or our utility funds, I would expect the city's contribution probably being up there in the, at least this STBG amount, if not matching the parks amount for construction of the project.
Great. Thank you so much. This is an excellent conversation. This policy board, hasn't spent much time, thinking about this and what should we do with the money. There was a previous policy board where one person suggested that, only projects that were for that whole MPO area. I was not in favor of that because to me, that kind of limits us to Highway 20. Highway 20 is the only road that actually serves Tomalo and Bend, so, for me, I'm happy to look at our region and, look further out than just the City of Bend. Greg, I see your hand is up.
Yeah. I just thought I'd make a comment. It's the fact that I am from Deschutes River Woods, and I do run that section of the road probably 2 or 3 times a month, and I'm sure there are other people that use it with bikes or peds. So from my area, so it's well worth it.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you for that comment. That's one of the reasons we appreciate your participation so much, is because yes, you are representing Deschutes River Woods for us. So that's great. Thanks so much. Any other comments or questions? I don't see any. I'd be happy to entertain a motion.
So I'll move approval of $346,750 in available STBG funds to be used for the City of Bend Street Preservation Program Riverfront Street / Deschutes River Trail Complete Street Capital Improvement Project.
Happy to second.
Thank you. We have a motion from Commissioner Chang and a second from Councilor Perkins. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And I see Robert turned on his camera so I can see his hand up. Thank you, Bob. That is unanimous. Great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Henry. Thanks for coming to talk to us about this.
Yeah, and thank you, Dave, and the city and everyone else. You know, Dave's been a champion of this project on the city's end, and just thank all the board members for considering this. We really, really appreciate it and hope to get this project done.
Thank you, Henry. I have no doubt that citizens of the community of Bend will be really happy when it gets finished. It is an excellent project. Thank you so much. All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, David. That gets us to item number 7. We have 2 informational items to go and about a half an hour. So I think our time is looking good. Item number 7 is the ODOT Transportation Electrification Infrastructure Needs Analysis. And Jillian DiMedio from ODOT will talk to us about this. Have we got Jillian with us today?
Apologies, I couldn't find the unmute button.
There you are.
Can you all hear me? And can you
Okay.
see my
Hello.
screen here?
We can. Thank you.
Great. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jillian DiMedio. I'm a senior transportation electrification analyst within the climate office at the Oregon Department of Transportation. Thank you so much for having me today. I appreciate this opportunity to talk a little bit about ODOT's leading role in driving transportation electrification in Oregon. And in particular, as you mentioned, I'm going to be discussing our recently released Transportation Electrification Infrastructure Needs Analysis, which we call the TINA study. So we'll talk about some of the key findings as well as what we're doing in terms of next steps. Before jumping in, I do want to mention that I actually live in Bend, so I am a Bend resident. And as a resident, it's great to see that this is an area of interest for the board. I did happen to see the editorial that was published in the Bend Bulletin this morning. And, you know, I'll say it's not an entirely accurate portrayal of our study and the modeling that went into it. It's really great to see the community engaged in this topic because it is a really important one. So first, I just want to give a really brief introduction into our climate office. We were formed about 2 years ago as a result of Governor Brown's Executive Order 2004. This was her executive order on climate change, which basically directed 19 different state agencies, including ODOT, to take immediate action to address climate change. And the Climate Office was formed not long after that, really as a way of centralizing all of our actions and strategies around climate. Our mission at this point is to make sure that climate is ingrained in everything that we do as an agency. And we do this work through 3 core areas. We have a mitigation program that's really focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector in Oregon. An adaptation team, which looks at preparing for and responding to the impacts of extreme weather events on our transportation infrastructure. And then lastly, our sustainability team, which is focused really on reducing ODOT's own environmental footprint. So how can we reduce greenhouse gas emissions from our own operations? So a little bit of context setting here before jumping into the report. I want to talk a little bit about why transportation electrification is so important in Oregon. I'm sure it will not come as a surprise to any of you, but in Oregon as well as nationally, the transportation sector is the single largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the state. It comprises about 40% of all emissions. So really addressing emissions from the transportation sector is essential for reaching our climate goals as a state. Back in 2013, ODOT released its statewide transportation strategy, which basically outlined a path to getting to a reduction by 2050 in greenhouse gas emissions from transportation. And while there are a number of strategies that we can undertake, by far the biggest impact that we can have is addressing the vehicles that we drive and the fuels that we use. And really making sure that every mile driven is a clean one. And that's where electrification comes in. ODOT does, as I mentioned, play a leading role in driving electrification, and we believe we're really well poised for this transition. As a state, we have a long track record of promoting electric vehicles that goes back more than a decade at this point. So back in 2020, and really in recognition of the fact that EV charging infrastructure in particular is a major driver of electric vehicle adoption, Governor Brown, as part of her executive order on climate, tasked ODOT with leading a major study to identify our charging needs in Oregon over the next 15 years. And this was the basis of our TINA study. I'm sure many of you know that Oregon has statutory goals for light duty zero emission vehicle adoption. This was set by the legislature in Senate Bill 1044. And the goals are shown visually on this slide. Basically, we had a goal of reaching 50,000 electric vehicles by 2020, and this ramps up to 2.5 million vehicles by 2035. And basically what TINA did was assumed that we were able to meet all these targets and then estimated what EV charging infrastructure would be needed to support these vehicles on our roads. So it was a needs analysis rather than a forecast of what is to come. And in addition to identifying the scale and rate of this needed EV infrastructure, our consultant team also outlined some of the key barriers that are responsible for stopping the acceleration of EV charging deployment, as well as some recommendations on policies and actions that we can take on to really overcome these barriers. I will say there's a ton more information in the study than I can cover in this presentation. So I would highly recommend, if there's interest and time, to take a look at our website. We have a lot of information as well as the full study and executive summary posted there. So a quick word on our project approach. The study primarily focused on the needs of light duty vehicles, but it did also cover at a higher level the needs of medium and heavy duty vehicles like transit and school buses, commercial delivery vehicles, and long haul trucking. We had 9 electrification use cases in total. And the consultant team started off with a review of existing conditions in Oregon. So the point here was to really establish that baseline for Oregon and get an understanding of how much charging infrastructure do we have now and where is it located, as well as where are the locations where we're seeing the highest rates of zero emission vehicle adoption. In addition, there was a literature review that was completed to really better understand how Oregon stacks up against other leading states, as well as nationally. And the purpose here was really to identify activities and benchmarks that we could learn from and emulate in our policies moving forward. And then lastly, there was a critically important stakeholder engagement process. We had 12 different listening sessions that were organized by use case, as well as a very engaged 17-member advisory committee that had multiple opportunities throughout the course of the study to really weigh in and provide feedback. In addition, we also provided opportunities for the public to weigh in, and we had an up-to-date website that had all the information really posted there throughout the study. So in terms of existing conditions, we currently have just over 45,000 electric vehicles in the state right now, which I'm sure you'll notice is below our 2020 goal of 50,000. So we definitely have some catching up to do here. About 2/3 of those vehicles are full battery electric, and another third are plug-in hybrid electric. And as probably anticipated, most of these electric vehicles are really highly concentrated in our urban areas and along our more urban corridors in the western part of the state. This represents just over a 1% electrification level, which doesn't sound very high, but I will say that a much more promising number is the market share of electric vehicles today. So we're seeing electric vehicles make up about 8% of new vehicle sales, and that's the highest it's ever been. It's going up on a monthly basis at this point. And Oregon right now is third in the nation for electric vehicle market share, behind only California and Washington. So we have plenty of electric vehicles on our roads today, but definitely more are coming, and we need to be prepared for their arrival. In terms of publicly accessible charging ports, right now we have about 2,300 throughout the state. The vast majority of these 3/4 are level 2 chargers. For those that don't know, this is a slightly slower rate of charge, taking about 4 to 6 hours to fully charge an electric vehicle. And then another quarter are fast chargers located along our corridors. And these are much faster, taking 30 minutes to basically get that charge. And as you can imagine, these chargers are really heavily concentrated in the areas where we have the most electric vehicle adoption. So really in those urban areas and along our western corridors. So in terms of our modeling results from the TINA study, it probably won't be a huge surprise to folks here that our TINA modeling tells us there's an extraordinary need for charging infrastructure growth throughout the state, and not only by 2035 to meet that 2.5 million EV goal, but also in the next 5 years. We need a 5-fold increase by 2025 and a 44-fold increase by 2035. And this immense growth is really needed across sectors. So for medium and heavy duty charging, but really is an order of magnitude greater for light duty vehicles. So as you can see, the challenge ahead is enormous, and getting this infrastructure in place is really critical to providing Oregonians the confidence that they need, that they can conveniently refuel their electric vehicle. So some other key takeaways that I do want to highlight here. First, in Oregon, there are significant charging deserts throughout the state. As I mentioned, most charging infrastructure exists where EV adoption exists. So this tends to be in our wealthier, more urban areas, which does leave significant charging deserts in our rural areas, especially in central and eastern Oregon, and also in our low-income communities in our more urban areas. And this is really where they're needed the most, because that is where you're going to see a higher density of residents of apartments and townhouses and people that are not likely to have access to at-home charging. As such, public investment, both state and federal, is going to play a critical role in getting this EV charging infrastructure deployed. And particularly in the areas that I mentioned, those rural areas, those underserved Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. And that is because there is private sector hesitancy here. The private sector is more likely to invest in areas where they know there are already a lot of electric vehicles. And so the public sector needs to be investing in areas where there is lower utilization expected in those early years. Equity needs to be a top consideration as we plan our programs moving forward, particularly in those communities I've mentioned, to really make sure that we're investing in low-income, underserved, rural, and BIPOC communities, and making sure that charging is accessible to all Oregonians moving forward. You've probably heard a little bit about the chicken versus the egg debate when it comes to EV charging. What comes first, the electric vehicle or the infrastructure? And we really believe that the infrastructure needs to precede electric vehicles. Contemporary studies actually suggest that this charging infrastructure needs to be in place 2 to 5 years prior to that EV adoption, really to address that range anxiety that folks have and persuade people that charging will be as easy as refueling their vehicles with gasoline. In addition, home charging we know is critical. Right now, about 80% of all charging occurs at home. But as EVs become more mainstream and you're starting to see more diverse adoption, a public charging network is going to be a critical component of mainstreaming EVs. And then lastly, I'll just end with this concept of it takes a village. We all need to work together, both the public and private sector, to really get these charging stations deployed, and highlighting especially the role of utilities here. Utility actions and outlook will play a critical role in ensuring a robust transition. We already work very closely with our investor-owned and community-owned utilities, and we certainly expect to continue doing so moving forward. So in terms of next steps, the results of the TINA study paint a pretty clear picture of Oregon's future public EV charging needs. And what we're working on now is really creating a strategy to meet those needs. So part of this work will include breaking down those TINA modeling numbers by year for the next 5 years to really estimate what type of stations are needed, where they're needed, and at what cost. This will include guidance for local entities on the attributes of attractive EV charging locations, as well as functional specifications for chargers themselves. And also part of this work will be creating a couple of user-friendly modeling and mapping tools for our own use, but also we're hoping that they will be very useful for local planners as well. So there will be an Excel model where users can see the TINA results for their community and be able to manipulate some of the inputs to our modeling and see how those impact the results. And also creating an interactive GIS map where users can see geographically where chargers need to be and screen for additional layers that can help them site those chargers in their communities. We'll also be doing a significant amount of stakeholder engagement moving forward with utilities, public entities, and the private sector. We're going to be reconvening our TINA advisory group, as well as hosting a series of public webinars and open houses. And part of this engagement effort will inform the state plan that we're actually in the process of developing for the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act money that is also coming to our agency, which I'll talk about in just a moment. I included the link here for our TINA website. It's a great spot to go to stay up to date on what's happening. And you can also sign up for our listserv there. Be notified when new public dates are made available or new tools are made available. And then lastly, we're always in the process of securing additional funding so we can continue to support equitable investments in EV charging infrastructure. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the next few slides. So as I mentioned, we know from TINA that we need substantially more EV charging throughout the state. And we also know that public investment will play a critical role. So we are in the process right now of developing a series of grant and rebate programs, which we are calling our Plugging in Oregon initiative. These grants and rebates will be administered by ODOT to both public and private entities for the purchase, installation, operation, and maintenance of this EV charging infrastructure. And we hope to fund these programs with a mix of both federal and state funding. And rather than a one-size-fits-all approach, each program in this initiative will really be tailored to meet a specific gap within the EV charging landscape. So we will have a corridor program that is really meant to address those gaps in public fast charging along our corridors. An urban core program we're hoping will address the charging deserts within our inner cities, particularly in those areas with a high density of multi-unit dwelling residents. And then lastly, a community program will address the high need for level 2 charging throughout our communities. So I'm going to go into a bit more detail on each of these, but I quickly want to mention that all of these are currently in the development phase. So this is a good representation of our current thinking, but specific details are subject to change. So I'm sure many of you heard at this point about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the National Electric Vehicle Formula Infrastructure Program in particular, or the NEVI program. This program will allocate $52 million to ODOT over the next 5 years for fast charging along our alternative fuel corridors. So this is a map of our current alternative fuel corridors. These are corridors that have been designated by the Federal Highway Administration as alternative fuel corridors for electric vehicles. So we have 7 corridors currently. You can see US 101, I-5, US 97, US 20, US 26, I-84, and I-82. It's very possible we'll be applying for additional corridors, but for now, we know that we need to spend this money on the corridors that exist. And I'll show these are the existing West Coast Electric Highway EV charging sites. And these are all other EV charging sites throughout the state. This is in particular fast chargers, and this does not include Tesla, I will add. So you can see there are some pretty significant gaps here, particularly along our corridors in Central and Eastern Oregon. So certainly we're going to be focusing on filling in many of these gaps. The federal guidance dictates that we need to put EV charging every 50 miles. So that is going to be our first goal. And I'll mention too that we expect more guidance from the federal government in May of this year. So we don't fully know all of the parameters of this program, but we are in the process of developing our strategy and eagerly awaiting that guidance. So I will just say stay tuned there. We also know the Infrastructure and Jobs Act included a discretionary grant program. This is $2.5 billion opportunity for EV charging, as well as for propane, natural gas, and hydrogen refueling infrastructure. Half of this money is going to be reserved for those same alternative fuel corridors that I just mentioned, and the other half is reserved for communities. The good news here is that there is a broader applicant pool, so not just ODOT can apply for this funding, any state and local entity, any MPO, as well as tribal governments are eligible for this funding. Our ODOT specific projects under this program are likely to focus on those urban core locations, as I mentioned, as well as medium and heavy duty charging. And we expect more details about this program in the late fall of this year. And then lastly, I do want to highlight our community program. This will be a great program for communities like Bend. This is supported with ODOT funding. We have right now $4 million in this program to support installations of level 2 charging in strategic locations throughout our communities. So we're going to be targeting in particular stop and shop locations. So this is your grocery and retail type locations, tourist destinations like state and national parks, anywhere where folks are parked for a little bit of a longer period of time, as well as multi-unit dwellings. In terms of eligible applicants, this program will be open to businesses, nonprofit organizations, and public entities. And we do anticipate being able to support about 75% of the cost of both purchasing equipment and installing those chargers. So again, I would say stay tuned. We're hoping to launch this program in the fall as well. So that is it for me. I'll thank you all again for this opportunity. Not sure if we have time for questions, but happy to answer any that have come up.
I think we've got at least a minute or two for questions. Thank you, Jillian.
Sure.
Greg or Tyler, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I'll start. I mean, I guess the first question I have, Jillian, is, I mean, there's a huge amount of money obviously coming from the federal government. Is there, I've read or heard that, there's going to be issues with, manufacturing capacity to actually be able to be making enough charging stations to get out there. Are you hearing anything about what that may mean for us, within Oregon in terms of, even though we have 52 million in IIJA funding, will we actually be able to spend it, over the next 3 to 4 years? Or are we going to be in a long queue, across the US trying to, secure charging station?
Yeah, it's a really good question and a definite concern of ours. I can't say that I'm hearing anything aside from our own internal talks, sort of wondering if this is going to be an issue. It's going to be a lot of demand on the same small pool of private sector companies. What I will say is that we're working really hard to create a program that's compelling for the private sector so that we can better compete with other states. So basically, we hope that the private sector wants to bid on our projects first and foremost, and that's definitely a consideration as we move forward.
Thank you. Greg?
Yeah, my question is I was noticing you were just saying the fact that you were stressing putting level 2 chargers in versus the DCFC chargers. I was just wondering why that would be, because those DFC are the quicker chargers.
Yeah, they are quicker chargers, much more convenient. There's no doubt about that, but they're also really expensive and complex to install. You need access to 3-phase power, So it often comes with utility upgrades, which can really increase the cost of installation. And so we do need to think about electric vehicles as a little bit of a paradigm shift here from gasoline vehicles, where you can refuel along highways in a way that's more akin to a gasoline station experience, but you can also top up your car every evening at home, or when you're shopping for your groceries. So there are many ways to get a charge, and they all will play an important role in building out this public network.
Okay.
Phil,
Yeah, I guess related question. I hear that there's a need, or I can see that there's a need on your maps. I hear that there's money available. I guess I don't have a good understanding of what the best candidate locations are for charging stations yet. I mean, when you mentioned the ODOT funds that are available, you mentioned shopping locations, tourist destinations, multi-unit dwellings, and you were just talking about how, there's the like charging overnight at home type scenario versus the like I'm going to plug in really fast, like I'm basically at a gas station type scenario. But do you have any kind of predictions or expectations about what are really ideal candidate sites for charging stations that, as we're out and about, we can be talking to business owners or facilities managers or, people like that about?
Yeah, we really do have to take an all of the above approach here. So the ideal location is going to change based on what type of charger you're putting in. So there's a level 2 option that is best for sort of an overnight charge. Those are going to be better for residences. A level 2 is a better option at places where people are going to be parked for longer periods of time, but not necessarily overnight. And then, of course, the fast charger is ideal along our like very close to our travel corridors. Like, for example, the federal government is actually dictating that we're within 1 mile of the off-ramp along these corridors. So very, very close. And that really is more akin to your rest stop or gasoline station experience. I will say this GIS map that we're developing, the other thing that will dictate the answer to this is really what your priorities are. This GIS map that we're developing will include a number of different layers that will allow local planners to sort of toggle on and off. Some of the layers include high density of multi-unit dwellings, high density of rental units. We'll have equity layers that look at income level, proximity to transit, proximity to substations. If you're talking about these DC fast chargers, which really need that access to 3-phase power. So it kind of depends on how you're ranking all of these various criteria. And the idea behind this tool is that every community is going to have different priorities. And so you can take a look, think about your community's needs, take a look at these various layers that we're offering, and really kind of hone in on the ideal location based on those criteria.
thank you. Tyler?
This kind of just I guess a question about just the overall power situation. Are the Oregon or the utilities that are operating in Oregon ready for this? I mean, in terms of just the, longer term, or even short term, just the increased demand. Are they going to be able to meet the demand now and into the future, particularly as you ramp up towards that outer, where you start looking at, say, having 90% of vehicles being electric? That's a huge, huge change in terms of the amount of power they're going to need to be generating and pushing out on the system.
Definitely. And I can't speak for the utilities, but I will say that they do an enormous amount of planning with or without electric vehicles to anticipate current and future grid capacity. So this is absolutely on their radar. They are planning for it, and we actually work very closely with them. So they do have access to all of the TINA modeling that we've come out with, and are using that in some of their planning as well. But yeah, I mean, this is what utilities do. They plan for this type of thing. And, I have full faith that, they're working hard on this issue, but it is something, grid capacity is absolutely an issue that we need to be aware of and planning for, definitely.
Thank you. And Greg, have you got one more super quick question?
Yeah, I think it's pretty quick. It's pertaining to state and federal gas tax. Is it going to be replaced or is it just going to be phased out?
Yeah, I mean, the gas tax question is one that comes up a lot. We have a separate team of folks within ODOT that are working on that exact issue, doing some modeling, coming up with some alternative programs to sort of replace or work in conjunction with the gas tax. Unfortunately, I'm not very close to that issue, so I don't feel like I can really speak to it in detail, but it is on the radar of the people within ODOT for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. That takes us to our next item, which is Safe Routes to School program update with Brian Potwin from Commute Options and Robin Lewis from the City of Bend. Brian and Robin, I have let us just walk all over your time. So I will say, maybe quickly through this presentation, and we might invite you back for a discussion and questions might be the way we decide to go.
Okay.
So now, just go as fast as you can.
Okay. Well,
Hi, Brian.
thank you for the time, Councilor Campbell. I do appreciate that. And, I think that many of you on this call are familiar with Safe Routes to School, so I can move a little bit faster through, the basics of creating fun, convenient, and safe opportunities for students to walk and roll to and from school, but really focusing on the fact that there's not only the education and encouragement side of this, but also the infrastructure side, which I know Robin wants to talk about as well. One of the big things that I wanted to get across to the policy board is really the transition that we're going through with our education program and also our encouragement program, and how that's actually shifting our role within Safe Routes to School here locally to really meet and adapt the current climate that's going on with schools and our community needs. So we've been involved in Safe Routes for many, many years, decades. And throughout this, we've worked with schools not only in Deschutes County and throughout the Bend MPO area, but also beyond. We've built some really good longstanding relationships, including with Bend MPO and many of you on this call. And we've really made some big transitions and changes due to all of the, known COVID aspects that have gone on, not only with the limitations with schools, but also staffing shortages and things like that. So we've gone a lot more virtual with what we've been doing, but now we're looking at more opening up and what that looks like for our schools. So we're shifting our model right now, and this is the main point I wanted to get across to all of you, what we're working on within Safe Routes to School. And a new initiative that we're adapting with is called Education in Action. And so this is really integrating the walking and rolling safety education we have been doing with organized groups of students and adults traveling to and from school. So it's all about reducing VMT, reducing congestion around schools, increasing safety, securing more equity in transportation, and collaborating with the community that we have built. The primary focus that we're going to be working on with this is the schools and the students that are in transportation disparities. We're applying for a grant with ODOT right now. It's an innovation grant to further this project along. Here's a great photo of some of the piloting that we've done. And I think you all are aware of some of the walking school bus efforts that we've done as well, which is groups of students organized with adults along designated routes. But what's new about this is really adding in that education piece. So why now? Well, like I said before, we're adapting to what schools need, to what students need, and what's really happening on the ground. Some of the challenges, like I said before, staffing shortages, bus routes are going down, but the demand is going up. Also, volunteerism has been going down as well. So that's why we see this as a funded paid leader program. And we are actually submitting this application to ODOT at the end of this week. We've secured some other funding, but we're only able to really fund 3 different schools at this time. We'd like to expand this as far as our goals into all schools in Bend Lapine School District, giving every student the opportunity to get this education and have the option of active transportation to and from school. Last MPO meeting, Rick Williams had a great comment or question about, well, why are we building schools in these areas where it's hard for kids to walk and bike to? Well, we can't really help with that. But what we can help with is getting these groups organized and creating safe, convenient opportunities for students and doing the education at the same time. So, Barb, was that quick enough for you? I mean, I don't think I took a breath throughout the whole thing.
Nick, you did fantastic, Brian. Thank you.
You're welcome.
How about Robin? Is she coming?
I'll try.
I'm sorry. You're kind of separate from Brian. Got it. Anybody have any super quick questions for Brian? Okay, Robin, you're up.
Okay, thank you so much. So I was going to go quickly through this slideshow. And I really just want to say the City of Bend is adopting new standards and specifications. We're on the second reading. And if you go to the next slide, I have a map. Slide, who's doing my slides?
Oh, do you want me to stop sharing so you can pull yours up, Robin?
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd
Okay.
be great.
There you go.
So this is in Appendix C of Part 6 of the new City of Bend Standards and Specifications. And I will zoom in because it's really tiny. This is really the city's precursor to our pedestrian master plan that we are working on. And what we are working on is identifying missing sidewalks that serve schools and parks and trails. And eventually it will have all missing sidewalks. But right now we preloaded the standards and specs process with just schools. So if we can zoom in on some schools, Northeast Bend, we've got Ensworth Elementary School, Mountain View High School, and this GIS layer allows us to identify that there's some missing sidewalks on, in this case, Wells Acres, Shepherd. And the beauty behind this map of showing these missing corridors that serve these schools is that whenever there's a development, if we see vacant land, the developer can instantly look and see what is missing sidewalk, what they might be responsible for building. Our EIPD team can look at it. We have a roundabout coming in at Butler Market and Wells, and we can see, hey, if we just added 300 feet of sidewalk, then we're closing the sidewalk gap on Wells Acres. And so this map, we really wanted to get it up into our standards and specs. And it will continue. Right now it says it's version 1. Because it is, we're, just version 1, but we are continuing to update this. And I really wanted to share this map because it's just a new opportunity for us to preload our pedestrian master plan work with the community with, here's the ones we know about that serve schools. Any questions on this map?
It's so cool. No question.
Yeah,
no question.
Just wow, it's so cool.
Yeah. So these red dots, those show missing crosswalks. So the dashed lines are the missing sidewalks, and then these red dots are missing crosswalks that we have heard from the community and students that this is a really tough crossing for us. And so we've added it to the map, and we will look at, now that we have new standards that talk about what makes a comfortable crosswalk in our community. And we'll be able to look at these and add traffic safety islands or change the speed zone, things like that, to make these students more comfortable as they're crossing these busy streets. That's it.
Oh, is that
ding,
it?
Ding. I have finished. It's 1:30.
Wow. Nice job. Any other questions for Robin or for Brian for that matter? All right. I will just tell the policy board what I should honestly tell you every month is if you would like to invite them back, just let me know. Or if you have, for that matter, anything that you would like to see on the agenda, please just let myself or Tyler or Hovey know. We're more than happy to add, presentations, information for the policy board. So Robin and Brian, thank you so much. Wow, that was
and my presentation, Tyler included it in your packet, so you can, read through my slides. If you have any questions on how the city of Bend is working on safe routes, just, reach out, let me know.
That's great. Thanks so much, Robin.
Phil has a question.
Oh, thank you.
I just wanted to say that I would love to hear back from Brian and or Robin. And I particularly want to hear what we can do, what the MPO can do. So like maybe the next time you could be thinking about a next time to come back with specific asks for I don't know, support of any kind.
Fantastic. I'd be happy to come back and
Absolutely.
Yes, that'd be great.
Great.
And I think Commissioner Chang, I was just going to say in that regard, with this new mapping tool that Robin and the mobility department are working on, and the pedestrian master planning process that's kicking off, we're going to have a pretty good list, I think, of capital needs, hopefully within a year and a half, around schools and access to parks, that type of thing. So I think that's something that we could look at with some of our discretionary funding. Is that something we would like to be pushing funding towards in the future? And then as Brian continues to grow and modify and expand his programs, are there opportunities for us to help him grow, help Commute Options grow their education and outreach efforts throughout the, Bend area?
Love all of those. Yes. Thank you, Tyler.
Great. Thank you. And I would say for myself, Brian, I'm interested in bringing back open streets.
I know you are, Councilor Campbell. I'd love to talk to you more about that.
Okay.
Open Streets is a great initiative that Commute Options led from 2017 to 2019, and we'd be happy to discuss that.
Okay, great. Any other business? Anybody? Anything you'd like to bring up at this moment? And then we've got a last opportunity for public comment. If there's anyone that would like to say one last thing, I think. Okay, I will apologize for running late. It's entirely my fault. And just thank everyone for your excellent questions and discussion, and our presenters. Thank you so much. Robin and Brian, I'm sorry I made you wait so long and gave you so little time. I really am. We will have you back with enough time to discuss and ask questions and brainstorm, and we'll look forward to seeing you another time. I believe that is it. Our next policy board member is April 19th at noon. And the last question we have for the board is it about time to move back to in-person meetings? Tyler and I have discussed this. What does the board want to kind of mull that over? And maybe we will maybe send an email, what you think? I think Tyler and I are kind of thinking that, yeah, we might be able to finally get back together and see each other in person. So perhaps in the next month or two. So I'm going to leave that as a something to mull over issue for everyone. And I will say that this meeting of the Bend Metropolitan Planning Organization is adjourned. Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great day.
Have a great day.
Bye.